and welcome to Agenda 2030. I am Tony Nkamiang John. In the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainable financing, strategic policies and impact programs are major requirements. Against this background, reinforcing government and stakeholders' commitment towards financing the SDGs in Nigeria has become more expedient. On the program today, we will be bringing to you an interview with Dr. Bala Yunusa, the Senior Technical Advisor in the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals, on the efforts by Nigeria to come up with a sustainable financing mechanism tagged Integrated National Financing Framework (INFF) for sustainable development and the outcome of the 10 years plan for the implementation of the SDGs. The interview is anchored by my colleague Desmond Utoin. To stay with us.
Thank you, Dr. Bala. And we'll be talking about the implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria. After about 6 years of implementing the SDGs, what are the milestones that Nigeria has recorded so far?
From the very beginning, when we set out to implement the SDGs in Nigeria, we faced the implementation of the SDGs into three main phases, if you like. That first phase is between 2016 to 2020, is to see how we could institutionalize the implementation of the SDGs. That means establishing the institutional framework that will guarantee effective implementation of the SDGs, and that is at the national as well as at the subnational level. That entails having similar offices like this one across all the 36 states. That means realigning our national statistical system with the requirements and indicators of the SDGs. That means customizing the integrated sustainable development goals model, which is a homegrown analytical tool that will enable us to do SDG-based development planning. That also entails, if you like, crafting an integrated national financing framework. And at the tail end, that means rendering voluntary national reviews either to 2 years in between. And also finally, that means having a coherent implementation roadmap that will take us into the decade of action, the period where we hope to scale up and accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. So far so good. I would like to say we've been able to do a lot in the areas of advocacy, sensitization, integration, mainstreaming, both at the national and at the subnational level, ensuring that all the strategic platforms are put in place. For example, the recognizing the role of non-state actors in the overall implementation and the achievement of the SDGs. We supported the establishment of the private sector advisory group on SDGs, the Donors and Development Partners Forum, as well as the civil society strategy group on SDGs. All these are strategic platforms meant to mobilize financial resources and expertise in support of the SDGs implementation in Nigeria. And all this have happened within the time period you've asked, which coincided with the first phase of the implementation of the SDGs.
Okay, you talk about phasing it into three, all right? Which are the other two phases that we are supposed to be concentrating or focusing on? If you have done the very first phase, 2016 to 2020, so what is the phase that we are now, and what are the key steps that have been taken in those areas? Okay,
the last two phases actually, if you like, signifies the last 10 years of the SDGs implementation, which is what we call the decade of action for the SDGs. So the last 10 years. So that is phased into year 2021 to 2025, where we hope that we scale up implementation now, not only at the national level, but at the subnational level as well. So that means scaling up implementation horizontally and vertically. And once we achieve that, then the last phase is that of accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, whereby between 2026 to 2030, enabling us to see that all the key segments of the society are together working closely to ensure we accelerate the implementation and by extension the achievement of the SDGs by the year 2030.
How well would you say that the SDGs has been mainstreamed or integrated into the National Development Plan?
Okay, so recall that once we commenced the implementation of the SDGs in January 2016, to be precise, by June, July, Nigeria found itself in an economic recession, and there was need to craft a medium-term development plan that would take Nigeria out of economic recession. And that is where we came up with Nigeria came up with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, ERGP, 2017 to 2030, and to 2020. It was a medium-term development plan with 3 cardinal objectives: that of restoring economic growth, investing in people, and building a globally competitive economy. And in developing that medium-term plan, this office worked closely with the then Ministry of Budget and National Planning to mainstream or integrate the 3 dimensions of the SDGs, the economic, social, and the environmental dimension into the ERGP. And so we're happy that at that level that was achieved. But now the successor development framework has just been crafted, and we are happy to report that the SDG model that was launched on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in 2019. So we now use that model to craft the medium-term National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. What that means is that the plan will be SDG based, and the plan was meant to be inclusive, broad-based, and participatory, not only for the national government but also for the subnational government. So to that extent, we've been able to achieve integration at the national level. In fact, that was the title of the Nigeria 2020 Second Voluntary National Review. We frame it to reflect how we are doing national development planning with the SDGs in mind.
Okay, part of the things that has been done so far is the realignment of the national statistical system, all right, with the requirements of the SDGs. That's one of the things that has been done so far as part of this implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria. But statistics is believed to be one of the major problems with the implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria. Even with the MDGs, it was a major problem. So how well would you say this has addressed the problem of data?
The whole idea of doing SDG baseline studies or report was to not to repeat the mistake of the Millennium Development Goals era, whereby most countries started implementation 5 years into the Millennium Declaration. In 2005, 2006, most countries started. In Nigeria, implementation started about the same time. So therefore, most countries did not have baseline for the Millennium Development Goals. And therefore, measuring impact after 10 or 15 years of implementation became somewhat tricky. So to avoid that, at the very beginning of the implementation, way back in 2016, this office worked closely with the National Bureau of Statistics to conduct the SDG indicator survey, basically trying to establish the baseline. Where do we start in the overall implementation of the SDGs in relation to the 230 key performance indicators? So once that mapping was done, gaps were identified. And to fill those gaps that were identified and to be able to realign the statistical system, we needed to go through a whole lot of exercise that we refer to the realignment of the national statistical system with the requirements and indicators of the SDGs. What that means is that with the SDG data dictionary, that's one of the key outcomes of that exercise, we now know which ministry, department, and agency should report on which of these 230 key performance indicators, right? And the frequency of that reporting. Incidentally, about 70% of the 230 key performance indicators will be coming from the administrative system of statistics, that is from the bureaucratic running of government, which is quite cost effective. Then about 25% will come generally from the periodic surveys, like the Living Standard Survey being conducted every 5 years by the National Bureau of Statistics, the demographic health surveys, and the multi-indicator cluster surveys. All these surveys will compose about 25% of that. And 5% will be computed, and what that means is that it will be derived by National Bureau of Statistics, having gotten the data from different sources. So the realignment, what that will do to us is to ensure that on annual basis, we will be able to track progress or no progress in the overall implementation of the SDGs. And we will now have the 230 key performance indicators against the 169 targets and the 17 SDGs. So it is a significant milestone, and to the best of our knowledge, Nigeria will be the first country to have successfully realigned its national statistical system with the requirements and indicators of the SDGs.
What is the nexus between this and the data bond that was signed with the MDAs some time ago?
So the signing of the data bond is buying the commitment of the ministries, departments, and agencies by their heads of agencies signing the bond against that of the Statistician General of the Federation, to ensure that this data that will be generated from the administrative system of statistics of the ministries, departments, and agencies will be collected timely and remitted, make them available to National Bureau of Statistics for computation. And therefore, on an annual basis, we have that progress report on these indicators.
Have they been keeping faith with this?
Yeah, the realignment we just completed the realignment December last year. It took us 2 years to do that. It has to have the national and the subnational components and the capacity building that has to go with it. So the report is available, almost ready. The draft is ready, and very soon we will be launching it and making it available to the public and obviously the policymakers for judicious use.
Yeah, aside the national level, did you also carry the subnational level along with all these realignments or the statistical
the national statistical system is comprehensive, both the federal and the 36 states. So they were all involved in the entire process. Regional workshops, capacity building, sensitization programs went into it, and the signing of the data bond also happened between the Statistician General of the Federation and the Statistician General from the 36 states. So the states are part of the national statistical system, and therefore the data that will be collected will have the subnational component and the national component as well.
So it's safe for anyone to say, or everyone to say in Nigeria, that in a very short while, every issue that we used to have about data problem will be over.
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm sure SDG is actually leading in that area in Nigeria. You recently worked on the national implementation plan for the SDGs in Nigeria, and that is to give a direction to the implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria, aside every other thing you have done, putting everything inside one document that somebody can pick and say, this is how Nigeria is implementing the SDGs in Nigeria. What would you say informed this, and what was the process that you have to pass through to get this done?
In the wisdom of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, it's belief that Nigeria has done a lot in the overall operationalization of the SDGs, like I've mentioned, all the key milestones that we have achieved. But often we get challenged by people asking for a document that shows if you like, the strategy for implementation of the SDGs, and it is within that context that we decided to develop. And at the critical point, what I mean by at the critical point is that the beginning of the decade of action, which is year 2021 January, will give us 10 more years to go. 5 down, 10 more to go, and that is the point that we felt that it is necessary to have a coherent, overarching implementation plan that will, first of all, review the past, discuss the present, and also project the future. And that is what precisely we have done with the National Implementation Plan which we tagged Nigeria Sustainable Development Goals Implementation Plan 2020 to 2030, Navigating the Decade of Action for the Global Goals. So our expectation is that anyone having this document will have the historical, perspective about the implementation and institutionalization of the SDGs in Nigeria, the key milestones that have been achieved, and then what is left, and the strategy for delivering the SDGs by the year 2030.
Okay, looking through the plan, I also have a copy here with me. Looking through it, I see that part of the things that you addressed here is the microeconomic framework and costing of the SDGs expenditure in Nigeria. And under that, you have the costing of SDGs expenditure in Nigeria. Does this mean that we have a costing that has been done with regards to how much is needed to achieve the SDGs in Nigeria?
Yeah, so what we tried to do, the macroeconomic framework will remain largely the same with that of the National Development Plan, because we aim at integration and mainstreaming. This plan, it's just an implementation plan for the SDGs, not a development plan for Nigeria. Yeah. And therefore, this plan will mirror the medium-term national development plan, 2021 to 2025, and the wider Nigeria Agenda 2050. So that is the context. So the macroeconomic framework will remain the same. But when you talk about the costing of the SDGs, remember the domestication exercise for the Nigeria Integrated Sustainable Development Goals Simulation model had a costing component. So pre-COVID, we were aware of what Nigeria will require to effectively implement the SDGs in Nigeria. So what we did was to bring that costing component into this framework to give our readers an understanding of the resource requirements. But there is a pre-COVID UN report that estimated approximately $85 billion annually. Pre-COVID is required to effectively.
Do you think that would have changed post-COVID?
Yeah, so this is the issue now. So we have to take another exercise to ascertain that. The impact of COVID is glaring on the socio-economic landscape. So we need a scientific study to now ascertain what are the resource requirements, the incremental, that we need to put together. But I think the exercise we are doing now on the Integrated National Financing Framework, trying to operationalize the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing Development, will enable us to also do some sort of mapping on where these finances will come from, and also the magnitude.
I was just going to ask how you intend to raise the finance and mobilize the finance for that, because if you talk about $85 billion pre-COVID needed for the implementation of the SDGs or attainment of the SDGs in Nigeria, and post-COVID is most likely going to go higher than that. And $85 billion dollars in Nigeria looks to be very huge, considering how much we have, the volume of money in Nigeria. How do you think, are you optimistic rather, that we'll be able to mobilize these resources to implement the SDGs in Nigeria?
Well, we don't have option but to look for innovative sources of financing the SDGs. We have to move away the general thinking of not only the SSAP herself, but also the Honorable Minister of Finance, who is the chair of the Integrated National Financing Framework Steering Committee, is to look for innovative financing mechanisms that will support the financing of the SDGs. The idea of moving away from funding the SDGs to financing the SDG is the way to go. I can give you an example. Funding comes generally from the public sector. And when you look at the budget of the Federation of the year 2020, for example, the federal government had about 10.8 trillion, while the 36 states combined had about 9.2 trillion. So plus minus the entire budget of the Federation in year 2020 was about 20 trillion. So that alone, if you put everything into funding the SDGs, will be grossly inadequate. And therefore, the idea is looking for the private capital impact investment, Sukuk bond, diaspora bond, green bond. Now we're talking even about blue bond and SDG standalone bond. So these are the financing mechanisms that we are looking forward to support critical infrastructure that will enable the achievement of the SDGs in Nigeria. So what we're doing with the design and possible implementation of the integrated national financing framework is precisely to achieve this, mapping out the entire financing ecosystem in the country, the public, the private sector, the philanthropy, and all that into one document that will guide our aspiration in line with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing Development, to see how best we can support this. And therefore, the future is funding, not finance. Is financing, not funding.
Funding. Yeah, I was just looking through the budgets of the country generally, both the national and sub-national government. $20 billion, 20 trillion naira. That's about 41 to 42 billion dollars a year, which is not even up to the $85 billion that is required for a year. So that looks scary.
Yeah.
Because we need to be able to more than double the resources.
Yeah.
Because we also have a deficit budgeting in Nigeria that we don't have all the resources.
So that is precisely where the private capital comes in. You move away from the public sector and mobilize resources through the innovative mechanisms and ensure that this is happening.
That's a lot in your hands. In the hands of both the office and maybe the entire government.
Yeah, all of us are on it.
Okay, I'm looking at the issue of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting here, which is also a very major component of the implementation of the SDGs. What are the strategic mechanisms you've put in place to ensure that this is on course?
Okay, recall the mandate of this office are fourfold: strategic planning, coordination and guidance, representation, advocacy and partnership building, resource mobilization and management, and finally monitoring, evaluation and reporting. And we do monitoring at different levels and evaluation. We do program level monitoring and evaluation. We do national level monitoring and evaluation. We do independent evaluation of priority SDGs, and also the voluntary national review. It's in the wisdom of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Is actually the HLPL is it's a follow-up review mechanism set up to hold world leaders accountable for their commitment to the 2030 agenda. So by rendering voluntary national review every 2 years, you are reporting globally on your stewardship of the SDGs. And therefore there is this concept of doing an evidence-based voluntary national review. And once you do an evidence-based voluntary national review that is all-inclusive in a whole of government, whole of society approaches, then you are able to, at that global level, render some sort of if you like, reporting that meets global standard. At the national level, obviously, we have the National Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. We have a National Monitoring and Evaluation Department, in the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, that monitors and evaluates all government policies and programs, so inclusive of what we are doing also here. But then at the program level, the intervention, the externality that this office provides to the federal ministries, department and agencies, and to the subnational governments on a regular basis, tracked, monitored, and also reported upon.
Okay, with the reporting that is done, maybe every 2 years to the HLPL, for example, it requires that you accommodate all the action points with regards to the implementation of SDGs in Nigeria. Everybody involved in the implementation, whether state actors or non-state actors. What are the mechanisms that have been put in place to ensure that what the civil society, the NGOs, the private sectors are doing with regards to SDGs, maybe corporate social responsibility, are all integrated in the report?
Yeah, from the very beginning, once Nigeria agrees to submit its voluntary national review, we go about establishing a multi-stakeholder co-working group that will guide the process for the development and the conclusion of the report. And it has always been broad-based, both representatives of ministries, departments and agencies, development partners, civil society, the organized private sector. Even now, persons living with disabilities were included in the last voluntary national review process. So within that co-working group, we sit down, discuss and agree on the strategic framing as well as the strategic approaches for the entire report. And so the last BNR we rendered was developed through a robust methodology using whole of government, whole of society approach, involving all the key segments of the society. Like I've mentioned, even the persons with disabilities were represented. The civil society strategy group was ably represented, and they had their regional consultations. The same with the organized private sector, and also feedback we got from the development partners forum also into the draft report. And all that makes an inclusive, a consultative and evidence-based report.
Okay, your words now, or rather, would you say that Nigeria is on track with the implementation of the SDGs? Talk to us about it.
Within the milestones we have set for ourselves, in terms of the phasing of the implementation, I've discussed the first phase. We are quite on track. Now we are beginning the second phase. I will say yes, we're in the right track. We have a coherent, comprehensive, broad-based roadmap, clearly spelling out what needs to be done on a yearly basis on our way to the 2030. And the role of key stakeholders have been clearly stated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bala.
Thank you. Pleasure having you.
And that's how much we can take on the program this week. Do keep engaged with us next week for another insightful episode. I am Tony Nkamiang John. Thank you for staying with us.